especially because we have kind of a small crowd here, that we'll be able to have a conversation and be able to interact quite a bit. Change the slide here. So hopefully you all know that you're here to talk about the issue of boundaries and consent, and really how you as parents and as educators can help children kind of navigate the complexities of these topics. So I really wanted to make this as relevant to our day-to-day lives. Part of what I wanted to find out, and here I recognize some faces, but I wanted to find out sort of the age ranges of the children, people we have in the room. So can you tell me, if you raise your hand if you have a K through 4th grader or younger? Okay. And if you have middle school age, like 5 through 8? Okay. All right, so you guys are going to get a lot of what your kids have heard too. Do you have any high school parents in here? Okay, so great. All right, so some overlap too. Okay, excellent. All right, so that just gives me an idea of sort of how much to focus in each area for you guys. I first wanted to acknowledge before I start that obviously these ideas are not unique to me, and so I wanted to point out some organizations, 2 organizations that have contributed a lot to sort of what I'm going to talk to you all about today. Both Rethink and the DC Rape Crisis Center actually have come here to give presentations to faculty as well. And then I also want to acknowledge my colleagues, especially counselors and the administrators here, who've also had a lot of input into what we're talking about and how we're having these conversations throughout the school. So I'm going to start out by kind of telling you a story about 2 students over their school time, I guess, over their careers here, okay? So the first student is a girl, and when she's little, she likes to play a lot with her parents, and one of her favorite games is playing Tickle Monster with her mom. So her mom is tickling her, and they're having lots of fun, and she's laughing hysterically, and then she starts saying, stop, no, but she's laughing a lot, and it looks like she's still having fun. So her mom keeps tickling her and continues to play the game, okay? So then we have our little boy who's in kindergarten also, and he's at a family event. And it's time to go home, and he's going to leave, and his parents stop him, and they say, you need to give a kiss to your aunt, okay? Before you leave, you have to make sure you give your aunt a kiss. And he says, I don't want to. And they say, you have to, it's polite. Don't be rude, give him a kiss right now. And the child leaves. Okay? So now our girl is in 3rd grade. And she's been having an issue with this boy who regularly is teasing her and chasing her around on the playground. And she goes and she complains to her teachers, and the response she gets from them is, oh, it's okay. He's just chasing after you, and he's teasing you because he likes you. Our little boy is now also in 3rd grade. And he's been feeling a little bit upset about being teased. He's been having some friends making some kind of personal comments about him. And when he goes to complain to somebody and tell them that he doesn't like it and he's tearful, he's told that he just needs to man up and deal with it. Now our girl is in 6th grade. And she's kind of feeling upset about something again, and she's standing in the hallway, and her friends can tell that she's upset. And so they immediately all run up to her and surround her and give her lots of big hugs. Our little boy now is growing up a little bit more and is in 8th grade. And he's been texting a lot with somebody who he really likes. And they've been talking a lot about a lot of different things they're into, things they like. And he finally sends a text message where he asks if the person can send something, a picture of themselves with their shirt off, but they don't have to show their face, so it's okay. Just send a picture with your shirt off. Our girl now is in 9th grade, and she goes to a Maryland game with her friends, and she's sitting there with a few people, and there's like a guy next to her, and they're put up on the kiss cam. But he's just a friend. And nothing happens, and because they don't do anything, the crowd starts booing. So finally the guy turns over and he kisses her. Now the guy is in like 10th grade, and there's this girl who he's been texting with a lot, and who he's very interested in. He can feel when they're together, like there's a lot of chemistry, things are really going well, things have been heating up. She even like acknowledged that she actually likes him and wants to be more than friends. So they're together in kind of a private place, and so he goes in for the kiss, and he starts kissing her. He doesn't feel her really kissing back. She's not responding kind of in any way, so he kind of keeps going, knowing that because she really likes him, she's probably actually really into it. Now our boy and our girl are both in 12th grade, and they're at a party at a friend's house. And they're hanging out with a lot of people, and they're both drunk. So they've both been drinking a significant amount, and the girl starts to come on to the guy. And so she's talking to him, and she finally says to him, "Can we go somewhere to be alone?" And so he decides to go with her, and she leads him into a room. All his friends are standing around watching, and none of them say anything as they go in there, and they both hook up with each other. So I've given you guys a lot of stories about these people over the span of their school career here. I'd love to hear from you guys what you think this trajectory tells us. All these different stories tell us about the issues of boundaries and consent. Where do we see them learning anything about what boundaries are and what consent is?
One of the questions it raises is how we set boundaries based upon gender.
Okay.
And the expectations of what would be appropriate for boys versus girls.
Okay. Where do you feel like you saw that or heard that?
Are you asking me or just?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it took me back to being a child and like being hurt and being told to man up, like boys aren't supposed to cry.
Right.
You could fall off of a freaking tree and have a broken arm, but they'll look at you and they're like, be a man about it. Don't brush it off.
Okay.
And a girl could like scrape her knee, walk, be like, oh, it's okay. Let me see how. There's that whole expectation.
Okay, so that's strong gender norm around that. Okay. Yeah.
What stuck out to me the most is the tickling and the girl saying no, but giggling, but no didn't mean no.
Okay, so mom didn't stop. Okay, great. Did anyone see anything else that was obvious? We're going to talk a lot more about these. Yeah.
There's forced kissing as well.
Okay, all right.
Where you have to kiss someone goodbye, although they might not want to.
Okay, so being told the message is that you put up that boundary, and but that boundary is not going to be respected.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
The teasing, the chasing, the kiss cam, all of that, that the women have to just put up with it. They're expected to accept it and roll with it.
Okay.
Absorb it. They don't have the power to say no or fight back because it's not what girls do.
Okay, so that's sort of gender norm of being passive as a girl, and that you're not expected to be assertive or aggressive or be able to say no or push back and say that's okay. Yeah. Kathy back there.
Well, the two stories that you talked about with regards to feeling pressure or that it wasn't accepted, like on the kiss cam that the crowd booed because they weren't doing kind of what was expected, but then at the party when the girl asked him, that nobody stood up and said, when you're 18 years old, that would be hard to do.
Right.
But yet it started, back along, several years back when she kind of went along with it because it was what the crowd expected.
All right, so there's that pressure from not just the one-on-one situations, right? But sort of
people you don't even know.
Yeah, people you don't even know, and sort of generally around you, it's expected this is something you should do or this is okay. Yeah. You gonna add something?
No, I guess similar to that point. I mean, socialization starts much earlier than I think any of us would really put into context, and it's until you see that within the spectrum of perhaps a child's school life until you think, oh wow, right, and it's probably happened to all of us at one time or another. So
absolutely.
So it's not just sort of that external pressures that are forcing them. It starts within the family network.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So yes, thank you for my segue, and then I'll take one more. Sure.
The kiss goodbye, hug kiss, or accept the hug kiss.
Right.
That's especially for girls. Boys say no, it's more acceptable, but when girls say no, it's less acceptable.
It's less acceptable.
So that could easily be reversed.
Okay. Yeah. So there's just again, along with what you were just saying, that there are these persistent gender norms and messages about consent and boundaries that we're giving to both boys and girls from the time, honestly, that they're born, right? From a very young age. And there are a lot of things that are very unconscious to us, right? We all have grown up with these same norms. It's not that we're bad people, as you said, or that we're trying to do bad things to our kids as parents or as educators. The reality is that this is part of the culture we live in, right? And so I think the bad news is that is the reality. That the bad news is that we right now expect people who are in situations where the behavior is now much riskier, right? Up here at the party where we're drinking and we're talking about things like hooking up or potentially even having sex. The bad news is that they have received so many messages over the years that say this is okay. You don't have to make sure the person is giving you consent. You can't stand up. You can't say anything. All that then people are in situations where they are either being accused of or have sexually assaulted someone, or they have been assaulted themselves. The good news is that we're here because we want to be aware of this, right? And that we can actually do something to change those norms, especially in our household and in our community. And so there are steps we can take, whether incremental or doing it consistently throughout our lives, where we actually can send other messages, simple things that we can do to tell them that consent is important, that you have the ability and should stand up and be assertive and set boundaries, and you also should be paying attention to other people's boundaries and limits and asking them what they are. So we're going to talk about all of this and how we can do this throughout the lifetime using these examples and kind of taking a step backwards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of start at the end. I'm going to start with the high schoolers, with the party, and that age group to think about what are we trying to tell them ultimately that we need to be giving them in pieces along the way, just like we have ultimately told them boundaries and consent doesn't matter by these little pieces we've told them along the way up until this point. So I want to start with something that I've done with the high schoolers too. So I'm going to ask you guys in a second. I'm going to say the beginning of the sentence, and I want you guys to just shout out what the missing word is once I get there, okay? Ready? So audience participation is important here. Okay. So no means?
No.
All right. I'm really glad everyone in this room knows that. It's important. And I'll tell you what's really great to know is that our high schoolers all know that too, okay? So when we say this, our middle schoolers, they understand this and people have ingrained this in their heads, and that is great, right? This is a strong cultural message that we've given to them. This is a message that is really important, but it is not enough, okay? No means no is not enough for a few reasons. One reason is that it implies, and it is often the case, that the person is saying something after it has already happened. So someone has done something and they're saying, no, I don't want to, or no, that's not okay, right? So it's already too late. The boundary has already been crossed, all right? It's also not enough because we know that our natural instincts when we're uncomfortable or we're stressed or fearful can often be something like freezing, right? For some of us, it might be push back, say no, and run away. And so we might be able to say those words or to do something with our bodies. But for a lot of us, when maybe we're uncomfortable because we want to even preserve a relationship because we really like this person, we just don't want to do this thing with them, we might freeze up and think, okay, I can't really say anything right now, so we don't say no, right? Or we might just kind of, with our bodies, say no, but we don't say the words, all right? Some of us also, the instinct might be to flee, right? So again, that's a way of saying no, but we're not actually saying those words, right? So what's important, I think, is that we want to reinforce this message that if somebody says no to something, absolutely you need to respect that, but we want to get it is what is the alternative, right? So we're going to do the same thing here, all right? And these little dashes don't represent letters, okay? It's just a line, a blank line, all right? So I'm going to say the beginning of the phrase, and I want you guys to shout out what the ending is supposed to be, all righty? Consent is?
Mutual.
Yes.
Okay, I love this answer. Right, so, okay, you guys can see how this is a little bit more complicated, right? And it's not as instinctive, or instinctual, what's the word? Yeah, it's not as much of an instinct for us to give an answer here that's clear. So all the things you guys said are really important, right? But again, this is a much more complicated thing than just the idea of no means no. So I want to get at why this is so important and what this actually is. What are we talking about when we say consent? So one of the first things I want to put out there is that we often have this idea with sexual assault that we're talking about somebody in a dark alleyway who's going to come and attack you, right? This is not somebody we know. This is a scary person. Absolutely, that does happen, right? And we do need to be cautious and careful in our lives, or try to be, right, to try and avoid these things. We know we can't always. But really, the majority of times what we were talking about is a situation where two people actually know each other. As you can see from the statistics here, the vast majority of sexual assaults happen between two people who know each other. And as you can also see here, when we're talking about college campuses, it can even happen on dates quite regularly, where people are deciding they are consenting to go out together, but they're not consenting to the rest of it. Okay? So what I want to put out here is that it is important, again, to talk about this no means no and talk about what it means to defend yourself, but that what we really need to be talking about is the context of consent in the context of relationships, right? And two people knowing each other and caring about each other, whether for one night or moment, right, or for much longer. What I'm going to say is that I think what this really comes down to is a culture of miscommunication and confusion. Now, what I want to point out to you is that I'm not trying to minimize this at all. I'm not trying to say this is not a big deal when I say a word like miscommunication. Because what we're talking about is a miscommunication and a confusion that has dire consequences, that has life-altering consequences. Okay? But I come at this when I'm speaking to students, and I hope you can as parents, with the assumption that my children, or the students I'm talking to, that none of them want to ever be in a position where someone accuses them of sexual assault. None of them are bad people, as we say, right? None of them are psychopaths who are trying to hurt somebody else, right? And by the same token, I can tell you that I don't think any of my students ever want to be in the position where they have been sexually assaulted, right? None of them want to be a survivor and have had to deal with this. So what we really need to help them with is how do they make sure that they are taking all the steps that they can to try and prevent themselves from being in a position where there is any type of miscommunication with this type of dire consequence. Okay? So, getting back to what are we talking about then? Sorry, let me match my notes. All right, so now we're going to really talk about how do we create this culture then? How do we get to the point where they are doing this in their relationships and their interactions with people on a daily basis, and once we're in these higher risk situations, that relate to human relationships, okay? So let's get back to this, what is consent, all right? You guys said a bunch of things that are really important, and I'm going to give you first this basic definition. So to agree to or allow, to agree to allow or do something, to give permission for something to happen or be done. So I think the first thing that's really important with our kids is that we establish why consent is important. So one of the things that I think has really resonated with a lot of the young people that I speak to, and that I know resonated with me when I first started doing this work, was this idea that we ask for consent in our daily lives all the time. It is so important to us. Just think of this basic example. If when I'm a little kid, I go up to somebody's house and I like their bike and I want to ride it, if I ask them beforehand, I say, hey, can I borrow your bike and take it for a ride? And they say yes, great. Then as I said, I borrowed that bike, right? If I go to somebody's house and I like their bike and I'm like, I want to ride it, and I go up and I grab it without asking them, that's now stealing. That's not borrowing. It was the same action. The only difference was that I asked beforehand, right? I asked, is this okay? And so what's hard is that for some reason we culturally are at a point where we have absorbed this idea that with things, with objects, we need to do that, right? But with something as important as sexual contact, kissing, touching in any way, that seems to be an awkward thing, a hard thing for us to do. That somehow ruins the mood or kills the chemistry, right? Yet for everything else, it's extremely important. So I'm going to show you guys a video in a second that talks about this with a phone, because that's something that a lot of young people care about and feels very important to them. So for a lot of people, they can kind of understand the connection there. All right, so the other thing that I tell the students, and I'm going to do with you guys, is I kind of get to the point with them of understanding that part of what we do when we decide not to ask for consent with sexual contact is that we decide that people are mind readers. right? We have this idea that people should just know what the other person is thinking in a situation, which is not realistic, right? So to give you guys an example, can I have a volunteer? Anybody willing to just talk to me for a second? Maybe my lovely colleague, thank you. Have you been in this presentation before, though? I have to decide.
No,
whether.
I haven't.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
So I'm going to test out my mind reading skills, and I think I'm pretty good, all right? So I'm not as good as Mr. Roth, who's done this before, but I think I'm pretty good. So I'm going to say a word, and I want you to imagine in your mind. Do not say anything. I want you to imagine in your mind what this thing is, okay? All right, bear. So now imagine in your mind what it looks like, what it's doing. Okay, you got it in your mind? All right, so I'm imagining that you are seeing this cute little cuddly teddy bear. It's like a Care Bear with a little rainbow on it, and it's sitting on your bed right now. Am I right?
No.
No?
Not at all.
Okay, all right, what were you imagining then?
Big grizzly bear that was eating garbage.
Okay, all right. Okay, so clearly my mind reading skills are not that great. Okay, so we're talking about bear. One word, one simple word, right? Bear. And with that, we were imagining two completely different things. What if we were talking about how far sexually we wanted to go? Or what kind of touch I'm okay with? What if I say kiss, and to you that means, you know, I'm giving someone a peck on the mouth or a peck on the cheek. And to that other person, that means our bodies are together and my tongue is your mouth, something like that, right? We have to remember that we have to ask and get consent, because there is no way we're going to know what the other person wants, what the other person means, or what they're okay with unless they tell us. That is the only way we can be sure that we are on the same page, right? That's the only way that I knew that he was talking about a bear and I was talking about a bear and what that was, okay? All right, so moving on, those are kind of the ideas of how we can tell kids why consent is important, older kids. So now what I want to do is show you this video with a phone to give you ideas of actually what consent looks like and does not look like, right? So we're going to see if this works. Hopefully it's loud enough. Uh-oh. I tried it before.
Hi, I'm here and I'm trying to figure out what consent really is and how to get it right. Hey, can I borrow your phone?
No.
Foiled. Hey, can I have your phone? No. Damn! Hey, give me your phone. Victory. Was that consent?
No, that was coercion. Consent must be voluntary.
Jonathan?
Yeah?
Hey, can I borrow your phone really fast?
No.
Okay, great. How about now?
No, clearly he was incapacitated and could not give consent.
Hey, can I borrow your phone? He didn't say no. Did I get it right?
No, two negatives do not make a positive. The absence of no does not mean yes.
Hey, can I borrow your guys' phones?
Why? What do you want it for?
It's okay, don't worry about it. I'm sure it's fine, just give it to her. Tell me I'm good.
Group phones make things complicated. Looks like the middle person was intimidated. Sorry, no go.
Oh. Look, can I just have your phone?
Yeah. Just no text or international calls.
Are you comfortable with me changing your ringtone?
As long as it's not disco.
Can I play with your game center?
No, my games are sacred to me, but you can update my software.
Shazam?
Shazam.
Oh. Tell me, please.
A-conscious. Voluntary decision without coercion or intimidation with clearly spoken boundaries. Congratulations.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so now that we've seen that, what did you guys hear in there in terms of messages of what consent is or what consent isn't?
conscious, voluntary.
Okay, thank you.
Setting boundaries.
Okay, you heard a lot of things, right? Okay, so let's start there, right? It's not just the absence of a no, right? You need to actually hear a yes, a conscious, enthusiastic, voluntary yes, I will give you my phone, right? Okay. Did we hear anything else?
The one example with the two people where the girl said sure and the guy's like, why? I mean, that kind of made me think about a typical group of teenagers and where, one person said yes, but the others weren't comfortable with it, that, what would a young teenager do in response to that? Like, would they feel like it was okay?
That pressure is so huge, right? Again, we have this vision in our mind of somebody being like, you have to do this with me. If you don't do it with me, that's the kind of pressure we think about, right? But a lot of times it's sort of that passive pressure that we feel from people around us. They're saying yes, they're doing it. So if I don't, there's maybe something wrong with me, or maybe I really can't, right? Maybe because no one does say no to this, right? So yeah, that sort of that piece of pressure, right? So that's not my next thing, but yes. So so go ahead. What else did you guys hear?
Clear boundaries, specified what that's going to look like.
Okay, so at the end there, he said yes to some things and no to other things, right? It's you can borrow my phone, but here are my parameters, right? So I didn't say yes, you can do whatever you want. I said we can do this one step here, right, and this other step. Okay. What else did we hear? What about the guy who's passed out? Incapacitated, okay. So we have to be conscious, right? We have to be conscious, all right? All right, I'll give you guys the rest of them, okay? So as you said, in terms of setting the boundaries and the parameters, right? We need to get it every step of the way. How often is it again, that idea of, oh, the chemistry, it just felt right, or that person, we started doing this, so the natural next thing is that. No. We all don't have the same interpretation of things. So for me, the natural next step might not be that. So every step of the way, we have to ask for consent. We can't just assume because someone kissed us that now they're ready to do something else. All right? It can only be given without pressure or the influence of substances. Okay? So that piece we just talked about, that pressure is so important, and it's so hard for people to grasp what that looks like and how to deal with it. But reminding them that the pressure can be something like a threat, if you don't send this to me or if you don't do this with me, I'm going to tell everybody X, Y, Z. If you don't do this with me, then I don't think we can be together because I don't think you're my type of person, right? There can be that very overt pressure that's essentially threats or blackmail, right? But then there can be that kind of cultural pressure or the pressure of your friends around you. The other thing here, though, again, with it having to be voluntary and the person being consciously able to say it, is that we cannot have someone saying yes if they are drunk or if they are high. And this is really, really hard for people to understand, okay? Especially because sometimes we have this nostalgia. What about the drunk hookups in college? That's how everybody did it, right? So we even have this pressure from parents saying that, like, really, that was kind of the way it was done. There's nothing really wrong with that, right? And we have situations where someone's saying, well, that person was interested in me. I didn't initiate, so I couldn't have assaulted them, right? But the reality is that you cannot give and you cannot get consent if you are drunk or you are high. Okay, we really cannot. Just like you cannot sign a contract if you are and have that be legally binding, because you are not in your right mind, you are not conscious and voluntarily giving consent. Yes, do you have a question?
Well, there's that one, if you loved me, you would, or if you really were interested, you would.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So that sort of pressure that we get, okay? So we really need to emphasize to them what this looks like, what really voluntary without pressure looks like, both for the person getting the question, right, and for the person giving the response in terms of consent. Yeah.
I don't know if there's a question here, but it just made me think of the fact that two teenagers and or kids in college, let's say, both could be under the influence of something.
Right.
Is there anything different? Or is there anything that speaks to that?
Yeah. So that's what's really hard, because that is often the case, what's happening, right? And so then we have all sorts of legal stuff, and different policies on different campuses, as well as different laws in different states about, so then who would be, so if someone accuses somebody, then who's in trouble, and it has to do with who they consider to be the aggressor, et cetera. But what it comes down to, again, is just that neither person can give it, right? And so this is, again, really hard because there is a strong culture of alcohol on college campuses. But this is where something we're going to talk about later is really important. your friends being involved and everyone around you being conscious of this too, right? And being able to say, that's not a good idea and that's not okay, right? Or watch out, or let's not, or, you know, someone's going to be in control here to make sure that something doesn't happen. But it's really hard. I'm not going to say that there's an easy answer to it. But the problem is the next day or right afterwards, right, when somebody sobers up, someone is going to be able to say, I didn't know I was doing this, or I didn't want to do this, right? Because they weren't in a position where they could know for sure what they were okay with or not.
Mom, do I remember correctly that there was a change in vocabulary on the part of the young woman from going from can I borrow your phone to can I have your phone?
You know, I
Can
didn't, you know, it's funny because I didn't notice that. Go ahead.
It was like that last time she was, can I have your phone?
Yeah.
But
Right.
she also changed her tone.
Yeah.
Can I just have your phone?
Right.
I tried 6 other people and, you know.
Right, whereas a little more aggressive at first, right? A little bit more serious. Yeah, I mean, and that makes, again, there's subtle forms of pressure that can be really hard too. And that's really why this like conscious yes, you know, is really important. So we're really clear that no one felt any pressure from us. So, consent has to be given even if you've done the thing with the person before. So one of the things that happens a lot is people say, well, you know, I've been in a relationship with someone for a long time. So we've been doing this a lot before. So like if I've had sex with them before, why can't I have sex with them again? Well, think about the idea that like people get together and break up all the time. They stop having sex, right? Or stop kissing or whatever it is. But somehow within a relationship, that's sometimes hard for people to get. And so what I emphasize with people too is that even within a relationship, even if it's not just a one-night thing, within a relationship, no matter what we're talking about, you still have to make sure the person is okay with it. And you still have to make sure to get consent. Obviously, if we have been with a partner for a very long time, there are different ways that we communicate. And it's not going to necessarily be the same thing that it was when you first started being together, where you have to really say, hey, you know, I'd love to kiss you right now. Would that be okay? Right? With my husband, that's not going to be the way I communicate necessarily, right? But we still have to respect each other's boundaries, right? I'm not interested right now. I don't feel like it. That needs to be respected and understood too. So we have to make sure that our young people get that as well, if they're dating or with somebody. Okay, so we get what consent is and is not now, right? So how do we take this back now and start to instill in our young people a culture that says this is important and this is the standard that we want to live by? Not the one where we go ahead, we feel like we're going to try it, and then if the person doesn't react well to it, then we stop, right? How do we get ourselves to the point where they think that asking beforehand without pressure and getting an active yes is what we should be doing, that that's the norm and that's the standard? So it takes practice and scaffolding, right, to build this up. So I want to just give you guys sort of the takeaway points, and then we're going to go through actual steps, okay? We need to, from a young age, be telling kids that they are in control of their body and that other people are in control of their own bodies as well. Sorry. We always have to ask before we touch someone. We have to make that very clear from the start, right? Consent has to be freely given, active, and enthusiastic. Yes, right? That's always going to be like that, but but just to give you an exaggerated version of it, all right? So what I mean by this is it can't be, again, that, sure, I guess so, if you want to, right? We need to teach our kids that that is not yes, all right? I think that might be my next one, which is no, or the absence of an enthusiastic yes, means no. If we don't have that yes, that means no, don't move forward, okay? We need that enthusiastic yes. Paying attention to and caring about what the other person thinks and feels makes things better for everyone, right? We need to be talking about empathy and about looking at other people and reading their body language, and talk about how that's also good in a selfish way, right? You're going to have a better time with somebody if you two are on the same page. If we talk beforehand about the game we want to play and we agree how we want to play it, we're going to have more fun, right? If we talk before we do something sexually and we agree that we both want to do it, we're both going to enjoy it more, okay? So that's why that empathy piece is so important. Sorry. All right. So as we talked about the gender norms, male does not equal aggressive and female does not equal passive, right? We really need to focus on how we are constantly reinforcing gender norms that make people feel either that they have to be aggressive and keep pushing forward, or that they don't have the ability to speak up and say, I don't want to, or I do want to do this. Okay?
So, Molly?
Yes. Oh, you want to go back? I'm sorry.
I think you may be getting ready to answer, because
Yeah.
I was just thinking, the whole notion of being in control of your body, then you think of this scenario that you gave at the very beginning of a little girl, and how often have we had kids, and Aunt so-and-so wants to give them a kiss, and the kid says no, and you're like, come on, that's like...
How do you handle that?
At an early age, we need to start practicing that, honoring their feeling about yes or no.
And we're going to go to that right after this one, because it really is important that we have sort of the alternative options of what we would say in that moment. Because if we don't have something prepared and practiced and we're not ready, that's really uncomfortable for everybody involved, right? And then that's often when because we don't know what to do, we kind of push ahead with what we're used to, right? No, you have to do this, right? This is polite. This is the right thing to do. So if we think about it beforehand, we're going to be better prepared. So starting with the first example with the tickling, right? Remember the tickling in the kindergarten and the no and stop, and you guys already spoke about this. This is so important. It seems so small, but from a very young age, we want to stop and let them know that we heard them. Now again, they actually might not mean no, it might be sort of a unconscious reflex, but we need to let them know that that word means something, right? No and stop means something, and I heard you, and everyone else should respect and hear you when you say that, and you need to be respecting when somebody else says that to you. So that's why I would stop and say, and I would stop tickling the kid and say, I'm stopping right now because you said stop. Do you want to keep playing Tickle Monster? Or do you want to stop playing Tickle Monster? So clarifying that with them. This also gives you the opportunity to reinforce with them that it's good when we're playing or we're spending time with somebody or we're doing something with somebody to stop in the middle sometimes and check in and see how we're all doing, right? To make sure that every step of the way we're checking it and we're okay. So this is one important thing that we can do with any type of activity together, wrestling, tickling, playing whatever it is, tag, we can be checking in with them. And even when kids are older, right? And it's not even necessarily physical stuff happening. We want to respect and show them that we heard them and listened to the stop and the no, and we talk about it. Okay? This piece about being in control of your own body. Okay? Again, this can feel so complicated, and I definitely recognize that culturally for some people, that is the way that you greet, right? So for some places, you might kiss on the cheek, and that's the way you say hello. For most people in this country, that might not be the norm, right? In terms of, it might be a handshake or something, might be the way that you meet a stranger. But I recognize that you have to figure out in your household and for your community what makes sense, right? But what's important here overall is that we are letting kids know that we are respecting the boundaries and the limits that they set up, right? Some people are not comfortable with touch, and we need to recognize that. So you ask your kid, would you like to give a kiss goodbye to your aunt? So we ask them beforehand, would they like to do that? Not, you have to give your aunt a kiss goodbye, right? And they say no, then give them some options. Would you be okay giving her a high five or blowing her a kiss, right? Tell her thank you, we're so happy we've been here. Tell her with your voice how much you care. Whatever it is, giving another option is really important. We also have to do this in a lot of other ways, right? We need to make sure that from a young age we're talking about what types of touch are bad and good, who can touch you, what are private parts of your body, actually telling kids about what the proper names for their body parts are, so that if something does happen, they can tell somebody and someone understands what they're saying, right? We need to talk to them about who is allowed to touch their genitals when they're washing them, right, from a young age. Who is allowed to see their genitals. We need to do that, and also, once they're old enough to be washing themselves, teach them how to do that themselves, so they understand about what are private parts of their body and that they're in control over them, okay? All right, so this one is sort of that unhealthy, the unhealthy gendered stereotypes. All right, so when we say to a little girl, or to whomever, right, but let's say we say to a little girl, oh, he's just doing that, he's just bothering you because he likes you, right? We're sending this message that the way that someone should treat you in a relationship is by teasing you or by being unkind to you, and that's the way we get attention, right? So we need to tell them, it's okay if we really do think that that's what they're doing. We obviously need to speak, someone needs to speak with that boy, right, and talk to him about appropriate ways to get attention. But it's also really important here that we're saying, we can acknowledge, look, he might be trying to get your attention, but that's not an okay way for somebody to get your attention, right? What do you think would be a good way for him to get your attention if he wanted to be your friend, right? We have to reverse those things. And I think something important here that I just want to acknowledge is that I'm doing a lot of talking here about stereotypes, right? I'm talking a lot about heterosexual contact also. Obviously, I acknowledge that things like sexual assault in relationships don't just happen in heterosexual relationships or where there is heterosexual contact. Certainly, also, I acknowledge that young men can be assaulted. But we do know that the dominant cultural norm, right now, plays out in terms of statistics where we have 99% of the perpetrators of sexual assault are young men. And the vast majority of sexual assault survivors are female, okay? So I want us to be aware of these things, even though, I am obviously pigeonholing people right now, because honestly, that's where we are, and that's what we're trying to change, right? So this man-up idea, you guys said this earlier, but this is so important. There's so many ways we reinforce this idea that you as a male need to be aggressive, not sensitive, not caring about other people's feelings, right? Not even caring about your own. And we want young men to be able to be assertive and care about their own too. We just don't want to reinforce you need to be aggressive, all right? Okay, we always need consent before touch, all right? This is so important from a young age. I know people might laugh at me because I try and practice what I preach. I really do. But my son asks me, he did this morning, he asks me before he hugs me now, okay? And I know this can seem weird to people. He's 6 years old, so he's very little, right? But he does. He came up to me this morning, asked me, because I had told him, I don't know if any of you have had this experience with your little kids, where they kind of they'll barrel at you, they'll run at you and climb on and grab you and almost knock you over, or you're doing something, and you're like, not right now, right? I can't deal with that. So I've spoken to him about how I love his hugs, and I love his nice, gentle hugs, but that sometimes when I'm doing something like cooking or doing something else, that I don't want to hug at that moment. So can he please ask me beforehand? And he does. And then he gives me wonderful hugs, right? Now, I'm still working on it myself. I actually am not great about asking him every time before I hug him, right? So I'm glad that he's hearing that. And he even told me a story at school recently where a kid had tickled him. And he said, you had to ask me before you touched me. Right, so I was really proud of him, whether he made that up or not. Hopefully it was true, the story. But he told me that. So I was really proud of him. And so that's something that, that's important that we reinforce because it can translate to different parts of their lives, right? So this consent before touch is so important for anything. It can be punching someone on the arm. We see this in school all the time, right? The little things, just teaching kids about space bubbles and boundaries, right? And when I say kids, I don't just mean the little tiny ones, right? Because we see this also in middle school and high school. We need to talk to people about how they can't just run up and do something like slap someone on the butt in a sports game, right? That's not okay because you're not sure if that person's okay with that. I also want to tell you guys that I've done activities with all the grades in the middle school and also the high school, but 6th grade recently on boundaries and consent. And I asked them to write down one personal boundary they had or line that they had anonymously, and they threw it in the middle so nobody knew who it was. One personal boundary or line they had that maybe people wouldn't be aware of, or maybe might seem different to people. And I cannot tell you how many people wrote down that they didn't like how people always came up and hugged them when they thought they were upset, or hugged them without asking them. A lot of the kids said they didn't like being touched, and they didn't like it when people automatically hugged them. So again, it's such a natural instinct to think I'm going to comfort you. There's research around touch and hug actually being a good way for people to heal, but it's not what everybody wants. So we really need to reinforce that with our kids, okay, that they need to ask beforehand in every situation. All right. How am I doing on time here? All right. Okay. So the sexting one. This is a little complicated. I put this in here just so you guys can see here. I picked an advertisement that I put in the corner that's from a regular magazine that you can just see standing in the aisle at the grocery store, okay? This is not porn. This is an ad that our kids are seeing all the time. So just to speak to the fact that they are surrounded all the time by these cultural messages that say, that being aggressive or submissive or whatever it is something that's expected. The sexting one is hard because it's obviously so important that we talk about this idea that we have to respect different parts of our body, right? And how these are special and private parts of our body. And that's something we can be doing from a young age. Kids sometimes will be pulling down their pants and mooning people, right? Or running around and lifting up their shirt and being kind of crazy. So talking about how not only do we not let people touch, but we also, we can't just assume people want to see or share private parts of our body with them, because these are very special parts of our body that we need to respect. So from a young age, that's important, and that's really gets important in middle school. The other thing I want to emphasize with this is we do a lot of talking to kids about not sending the pictures, right? Don't be the one who sends the pictures. Don't do this, and it's really important we talk about that, right? These pictures have a life after they're sent on. They can be used for revenge. They can be spread around, and so it's really important they know that. We also need to talk to our kids about not asking for the pictures. There's a good article about this, that there's a lot of pressure that's felt. Again, it doesn't feel necessarily like this overt pressure. Like, it's not that the person in this scenario was threatening and saying, you have to send it to me. That does happen, right? But that's not the case. It's more the sense of, if I don't, what'll happen next? Will this person not like me? Will they think I'm weird? Is that not okay? There's research showing that a lot of times, young women especially send these, they don't feel comfortable with it, they don't really want to, but they kind of feel like they have to. Okay, so we need to talk to our kids about not asking for these too. Okay? All right, so this one is important. Consent is without pressure. I think I'm going to show you guys a little video clip, and I want us to think about this idea of how we've come to this point where we think that kind of the most romantic thing is the big gesture, right? For teenagers especially, because we're posting things all the time, we're chatting things, we're sending things around. This idea that you're gonna have to like one up somebody or do this amazing thing. So I want us to think about things like kiss cams and these things that I don't think happens much here, but a lot of places can happen, things like promposals or big public displays where we're again trying to do this grand romantic gesture, but in the end we end up kind of pressuring people. So I'm going to show you this clip that's supposed to be one of the most romantic movies, not very recent movie, but one of the most romantic movies ever, and I want you
So it's really nice to meet you. Who is this guy?
I don't know. No Calhoun.
I would really like to take you out.
Fred,
do you mind?
you can't sit more than two people in a chair, no one.
Okay, Tommy, all right.
Get down, no, you're gonna kill yourself.
No, cut it out. Well, you got me?
What? No. No.
No. Hey, pal, she just told you. Why not?
I don't know, because I don't want to. Ella?
All right, well, you leave me no other choice then. Oh, my God.
I'm okay, no, stop fooling around.
What are you doing?
Oh, I got the ball.
I'm going to ask you one more time. Will you? Or will you not go out with me? God damn, my hand's slipping.
You're trying to buy, you idiot.
Not until she agrees.
Oh, go out with him, honey. Okay, fine. I'll go out with you.
Well, don't do me any favors.
No, I want to.
You want?
Yes.
Say it.
I want to go out with you.
Say it again.
I want to go out with you.
All right. We'll go out.
You think you're so smart, don't you? That wasn't funny, no, you idiot.
All right. You guys get the idea. So she said yes, she wanted to go out with him, right? Okay, so, whoops, sorry. Where was the pressure there? Anywhere? Yeah, everywhere. I'm going to kill myself if you don't go out with me, all those things. She said no multiple times, right? So again, this idea we're getting fed from multiple places, this idea that the grand romantic thing is the way to go, yet not recognizing how we can be pressuring publicly, and actually we're not getting an active, enthusiastic yes. We're not getting consent without pressure in those cases. So talking to kids about that and and emphasizing that is really important, so that we don't set them up to think that something big and bold out there is going to actually get them a real yes. Something else that's really important is this idea of paying attention to facial expressions and body language. So you guys might remember in the scenario with the kissing where he just kept going, that there was this idea, well, if she told me she liked me, so if I just keep kissing, eventually she's going to all of a sudden be like, oh, this feels great, right? What I had told you guys was that the girl was not kissing back, right? She wasn't responding and saying this was okay. So he certainly didn't ask beforehand, so we didn't get consent in that way, but also then didn't pay attention to the facial expressions and body language. So I'm going to show you guys another clip from another movie quickly, just because I think these are things that you can actually use too that can be helpful. So this one's a little bit more complicated. You can only find the clip in Italian. So I'm going to mute it for a second, and then I'm going to it's going to take a second, so bear with it, because I'm going to mute it, and then I'm going to turn up the sound for a second. Okay, so I just want you to watch what's happening here. So he's talking to her about the recipe and all this. I don't know if anybody's seen Ratatouille before, but let me just make sure the one's that way. She's got mace, right?
No, no!
Get the idea, right? So how many times have we seen that in a movie, right? Even a movie, and I love Ratatouille, right? Even a movie, for young people, right? This idea of just keep kissing, eventually then she'll stop resisting, right? Yeah. So we give that message over and over again, culturally, and again with this idea we say you just feel it, you feel the chemistry, it feels good. You're feeling that chemistry, but we don't necessarily know if the other person is feeling it. So really teaching them through, you can do this actually by looking at movies or videos and stopping at moments and saying, hey, like, what do you think that person means by that facial expression they're making, right? We can teach empathy through watching things or also through stories. We know that that's actually like a very effective way of teaching people how to read other people's cues, right? So as I said earlier, this is sort of checking in part 2. I really want to kiss you right now. Can I? So that's the beforehand. And then if you're not getting a kiss back, even if they've said yes, are you still up for this? Is that okay? All right? So it's really important, as I tell the teenagers, right, is we're not looking for the, okay, we're looking for the, yes, I'd love to, right? Or that sounds wonderful. I'd like to do that too. Or I'd love to kiss you also, right? That's the stuff that we really want to hear, and that's the body language we want to feel. Okay, so our last scenario really had kind of everything in it. It gets back to the stuff that I talked to you guys about in the beginning and that video that we watched. So this is really the culmination of everything. So when we're getting to the older grades, it's really important that we're talking about all of the different things which I'll review with you. But one of the big things I want to emphasize here is also this piece of helping our young people to be upstanders. Okay? It can be so hard to be in a space and be the one who says that's not okay or that's not cool or however you want to say that, right? I don't think anyone probably really uses the word dude anymore, but I put it on there, okay? So some sort of something to soften it. And you can ask them for the language. Ask your teenager, like, what would you say? Yeah, bro, right? Yeah, like, that's not okay, right? So I'm not asking them to be like me and be like, that is not okay. I did not appreciate that language, or whatever it is, right? I know that they're not going to speak that way to each other. But it is so powerful, especially for young men, if they are standing in a group and somebody is willing to say, yeah, that's not so funny when you're joking about, like, having messed around with her when she was drunk. Like, she was so drunk that da-da-da. Like, that's actually not funny. That's not okay, right? Finding a way, asking them now, how would you say that? How would you feel comfortable saying that in front of your friends, right? That is so important and so powerful because that's a lot of that cultural pressure that you were talking about earlier, right? That you don't recognize is there because it's not what we imagine pressure to look like. So that piece is so important, that we're talking about that, and we try, right? We're trying in school all the time to talk about that being an upstander, but it really takes hearing from other people. I think, sorry. Yeah, actually, I missed one thing that I wanted to tell you guys, but I think you guys get the idea, so it's okay. So again, to remind you guys back to go back to the things we talked about in that video and what's important to emphasize. We need to talk to them about all those things, about being beforehand, about asking before we touch somebody, about making sure that there's no pressure, emphasizing the piece around alcohol. It's not okay that they went back there. It's not okay because neither of them could consent in that situation, right? I also want us to emphasize to both our boys and our girls that they need to ask. Because even when I've done this presentation, I hear a lot, well, the guy's supposed to do this first, if we're talking about a guy and a girl together, right? Well, it's on the guy. And I hear that even from the girls, right? So we need to remind that they also need to make sure that that guy or the girl, whoever they're with, that they're okay with what's going on, okay? That it's not just a one-sided thing. We need to be teaching this to everybody. And so I think that's really important for them too. And also this piece about how to assertively say, yes, I want to, or no, I don't. So we can't completely get away from that no means no, right? That's really important too. That if someone is stopping, if someone is hesitating, we have to respect that. The other thing that can be hard for us as parents of older people, adolescents or teenagers, is that we do have to acknowledge, talk a little bit about the positive things that can happen in relationships and even with sexual contact. And again, I'm talking about sexual contact down from kissing on up, right? I'm not just talking about having sex, okay? Your guys' values are so important. It's important you talk to your kids about them. But we also have to be, we also have to be realistic about what they might be thinking about, questioning, and exploring, okay? So what that means is we have to talk about how consent can actually be attractive. Something that Mr. Roth had brought up when he was helping me present to the boys in 8th grade was this idea that right now, because it is not the cultural norm to ask for consent, a lot of people find it really attractive if you do ask for consent. Makes you look very caring, right? It makes you look like someone who actually is in touch with the world. And so that actually can be a really attractive thing, just the actual act of doing it, right? And so we also, though, need to acknowledge that there might be some people who are like, oh, like, why are you asking me? Like, you're supposed to just go ahead and jump ahead, right? So we have to talk to them about how do they handle that if somebody says that to them. Honestly, it's all about them finding their voice and their way of doing it. We can give them examples, which is important, but we also have to recognize we have to help them find their voice and imagine how they would do it. I tell the kids, and just like I'm telling all of you, we have to practice this stuff. So it's not too late. Even if we didn't start doing this when they were little, right, we can talk about it now. So tell them, all right, starting from now on in the house, we're going to make sure we are asking before anything and we are giving an active yes. And that can be a joke, right? I don't want people to make fun of sexual assault, but it's okay if you're joking around a little bit and laughing when I'm like, yes, I'd love to have the pasta right now, right? Something like that. That's an okay way for you to really get across and get stuck in their heads that we have to ask for things. Reminding them to start paying attention. Your friend might not want a hug, right? We need to make sure before we touch somebody that we've asked them that. And really talking about if they are in an intimate situation, saying, I'd really like to do this, would that be okay with you, right? Finding ways to say those things. And again, reminding them the body language, etc. I really, again, want to emphasize with them, the young people, that's important that if there is any hesitation on your part, if you are not sure that you have gotten an active yes, then you need to find a way to back off, right? And one of the biggest things they're going to be worried about is if I back off and say, okay, I don't feel like doing this anymore, or if I do say no, that person is then thinking we're saying no to ever hanging out again, or that person's going to be embarrassed, so they're never going to want to be with me again, right? So we have to help them find ways to say that and preserve a relationship. Obviously, if they're in a dangerous situation or something's going on, we need to teach them how to be assertive and even aggressive if they need to get out of it. But again, the majority of situations we might be dealing with, it's really about a relationship and figuring out how in that moment to handle it. That's where we talk about the preserving the relationship. So if you're not clear if the person gave you an active yes, say, are you sure? Are you still up for this? And if you're still not sure, find an excuse, right? You know what, I'm tired, let's do this again another time. Whatever it is, right? I'm not sure if you're into this right now. I'd rather wait until you're sure. Okay? So finding ways to help them preserve that relationship can be really important. So all this to say, I showed you some cultural images that are not so lovely, but I also think it's really important that we don't just say, okay, don't show your kids any of this, right? It's pretty impossible. In fact, it might be a little bit annoying after this presentation. You might start noticing in everything you watch instances where consent is not given or asked for, but it is everywhere. So we can't just say, like, ban it all, right? Because this is culturally where we are. Maybe there will be a shift now, especially as we're talking, as there's movements in Hollywood with the Me Too movement and such, and Time's Up. But for right now, again, I love the movie Ratatouille. I think it's great. I don't love that scene, okay? So what do? I pause that scene and I talk to my kids. We talk about, right? You can actually use this stuff. That magazine you see, in your house, talk about, like, what do you think this means with your older kid, right? What does this represent? Actually having the conversations will actually help them learn more too. So it's not this sense of, like, eliminate it all, ban it all. It's let's figure out how we can use this as a teachable moment. So, getting to the end where I get any questions from you guys. I think that it can feel overwhelming and upsetting because we really do, especially now, there's been so much brought to light about how prevalent sexual harassment and sexual assault is. Okay, so it can feel like, what can I do? Right? And so our instinct can be shame, defensiveness, helplessness. I've done some of these things before, like maybe it's not okay, right? So I want to tell you guys that really what I'm asking here and what I hope you're absorbing is that we can do something, right? Any little thing we can do will be a positive improvement. So what I'm asking you to do is really start noticing. Notice those things around you that you might see, you might say, you might do, right? That might contribute to reinforcing that boundaries and consent are important, or doing the opposite. And then think about how we can make positive change that's realistic for us. What works in my household? What works with my children? My children of different ages, it's going to be different what I'm going to do, right? So I want you guys to really walk away with the understanding that you can do something. And I hope that you'll be able to find what that is for you. There are a million resources out there. I wanted to just highlight two that I think are really good in breaking this down in a very simplistic way, and you'll hear in these articles a lot of what I said tonight. These movies are ones that kind of give a bigger context to sort of the gendered piece that can be really good to kind of to wrap your head around, or if you have much older kids, can be good to even watch. I also have tons of consent videos like the phone one that I showed you guys. Some of you might have even seen the T one that's been out there. There are other ones. So I'm happy, if you reach out to me, I'm happy to send you guys anything that would be helpful to you. Do you want me to leave that up for a second? Or should I? Yeah, okay. I'll switch. So I was just going to give you my email, but that's on the next slide. So while it's up there, I'd love to take any questions you guys have or any comments you have. Yeah.
Just one quick question.